youngster,
Please, please.
we have been discussing about fundamental rights and discussed finally about various rights under Article 14 to 18. Now we discuss the most important articles and part of part 3 fundamental rights about right to freedom and protection of life and personal liberty. So far as right to freedom is concerned, we know that generally speaking, all citizens have to freedom of speech and expression. About that, we know very well, and all other rights to move freely, peacefully, without arms, and to form associations or unions, or to move freely throughout the territory of India, and to reside and settle any part of the territory of India, to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade or business. These rights we discussed in previous class also, and there are certain restrictions while enjoying those rights. About all these things we already discussed in previous class. Now we'll see Article 20 and 21, which are very important and which protects our life and personal liberty, and which makes a person not to be punished twice. Article 20 deals with protection in respect of conviction for offences. What it says is, unless and until there is violation of law by any person, that person shall not be convicted of any offense. And that particular law also must be enforced at the time of the commission of the act charged as an offense. So, an offense, if is committed, how to decide? You have to see when any allegation is there about committing of an offense before conviction of that person, that whether there is any violation of law in force at the time of commission of the act charged as an offense. Likewise, that person who is convicted also shall not be subjected to a penalty greater than that which might have been inflicted under the law in force at the time of commission of the offense. Suppose by the date of commission of offense, if there is no law stating that particular offense, if committed on that date, is punishable, or there is no provision for punishment for that offense contemplated or created or explained or defined, then that no person shall be deprived or convicted for the said offense with which he is charged. So, you can't convict a person by making a particular act as an offense subsequent to commission of that offense. So, there must be a law in force at the time of commencement of the offense. You have to see what is the law and whether that law is in force. If that law is in force, then is there any violation of that law? If there is violation of law, then you can convict that person. Not only that, you also not entitled to impose a penalty greater than that which might have been inflicted under the law in force at the time of the commission of the offense. What was the punishment that was provided or defined in the law for giving as a penalty to that person who committed the offense at the time of commission of the offense? To that extent only you are entitled to impose the penalty, not more than that, not greater than that. This is Article 20. So you can understand this article in a simple way, that to convict a person for violation of any offense, you must see that a particular law was there by the date of committing the offense, and there is violation of that particular law. Not only that, if you are charged with an offense, then you can claim that the punishment that was provided under the act as on the date of commission of offense only can be imposed, not greater than that. This is Article 20, Clause 1. Then the second is, if a person is convicted of an offense once, he shall not be convicted for that offense again and give punishment to that person. So for one offense, only one time punishment be given. You can't impose punishment repeatedly by convicting that person repeatedly. If there is a conviction once, then that conviction and the punishment after prosecution of that person and conviction of that person for that offense, if given, that's enough. You can't, for the same offense, give punishment or even entitled to prosecute for that offense. If a person is prosecuted for committing an offense once, then he is punished. There ends. He can't be prosecuted and punished once again for the same offense. If that person repeats the offense, then you can again prosecute that person and give punishment. If the offense is committed by that person by violation of the law in force, then he can be prosecuted and punished. There ends. You can't again prosecute and punish that person for the same offense. This is what Article 20, Clause 2. Then another important article is, most of the time the police violate this particular Article 20, Clause 3 is, no person accused of any offense shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. If I commit an offense, I shall not be compelled to speak against me as a witness for the offense alleged to have been committed by me. So you can't compel me to give evidence as a witness against me. So any person cannot be compelled to be a witness against himself. These three are very important. In the light of these three articles, one article and three clauses, we have to go and understand Article 21. So three rights are there. If a person is charged with committing of an offense, he can be prosecuted and punished if the law is in force, and once he is prosecuted and punished, he can't be again punished. And also, you can't impose a penalty greater than the one that was in force as per law at the time of commission of the offense. Then you can't compel a person to give evidence as a witness against himself. If you do it, then it is violative of the Article 21 to 3. My namaskarams to all of you and best wishes to youngsters. Now we are dealing with or discussing about Article 21, which is part of Part 3 under the heading Right to Freedom. This article, for the sake of all of us, I read. This article says, protection of life and personal liberty. This is the title. Protection of life and liberty. It says, no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. So, you can't be deprived of your life or personal liberty if there is no procedure established by law. So what we have to see is that there must be law, and as per that law, including of the procedure of that law, only a person's right to life or personal liberty can be deprived. This is what this particular Article 21 says. So this, under this article, the Honorable Supreme Court is reading a lot of rights in the name of citizens of this country. So if you are interested to know whether a particular right is a fundamental right and it comes under Article 21 or not, you have to understand clearly, firstly, about whether that right is a right to life or it is a personal liberty violation. If it is so, then it is violation of Article 21. For violating that Article 21's rights, there must be law, including procedure of law. If that is not there, you can simply say that it is unconstitutional, illegal, and in contravention of the provisions of Part 3 of the Constitution as per Article 13, Class 2 of the Indian Constitution of the Constitution of India 1950. Then right to education, we know that age of 16 to 14 years children, compulsory education must be there. So if it is the state which has to provide the compulsory education to children. Then we have Article 22. It says if you are going to arrest a person, you must inform him, first of all, or as soon as it is practical, the grounds of such arrest. The grounds of such arrest. So a person who is going to be arrested can claim, sir, under what provision and under what grounds you are going to arrest me? If those grounds of such arrest are not informed to that person and he is taken into custody, then it is violative of Article 22. Not only that, a person who is taken into custody is entitled to consult and to be defended by a legal practitioner of his choice. So if you are going to arrest or take any person into custody, that person can ask the authority who is going to be arrested two things. Sir, what are the grounds under which you are going to arrest me or arrested? Secondly, I am having a right to consult and for defending me on my behalf by a legal practitioner of my choice. Please allow me to discuss with my advocate or lawyer or legal practitioner for protecting my rights and for defending me. This is Article 22, Class 1. Then Article 22, Class 2 says that within 24 hours of the arrest and taking a person into custody, he must be produced before a nearest magistrate, excluding the necessary time for the journey, and no person shall be detained in custody beyond the period without the authority of a magistrate. So, if you're going to arrest a person, after arresting that person, you must note the time of arrest and within 24 hours, excluding of the time taken for journey, you must produce that person before the magistrate, and as per the authority given by the magistrate only, you can continue the detainment or custody of that person who was arrested by you. Then other things are there. in respect of what to be done in case of violation of this particular article 22 and all that, and what are the various rights when a person is arrested of preventive detention, and also constituting of advisory board, and then other things. So these articles clearly says about how to protect the life or liberty or personal liberty of a person. You are not entitled to deprive the life or personal liberty of a person except according to the procedure established by law. But what was happening in India all these times? People say that emergency is once again indirectly imposed in our country because of illegal arrests or legal arrests without proper procedure and remedy. You know about recent death of F.R. Swami. This F.R. Swami was suffering with various ailments. He had preferred to die in prison rather than get treated in any hospital. That is what he submitted to Honorable Bombay High Court. Because on May 21, a committee of the doctors led by the Dean of JJ Hospital examined Dr. Father Swami. Their report said he has bilateral upper limb tremors, bilateral hearing loss, generalized weakness, occasional loose stools, and occasional lower back pain. So many things. But the Honorable High Court of Bombay, of its division bench, Justice S.A. Katawala and S.P. Taved noted that he is having severe hearing problems and he is physically very weak. But that person, that is F.R. Swami, doesn't want to be taken treatment at any hospital, and he is preferring to die in jail rather than get admitted to any hospital. Thereby, court observed that his health is completely deteriorated after he was sent to Taloja prison, and it also observed that there is a lot of give and take in the prison. He insisted that he should get interim bail, but unfortunately, the Honorable Court, by observing certain important facts, dismissed his bail application by rejecting the bail. Swami's plea, Dr. Father Swami's plea is medical plea. The special NIA court said, prima facie it can be gathered that Father Stan Swami, along with other members of the banned organization, hatched a serious conspiracy to create unrest in the country, entire country, and to overpower the government politically and by using muscle power. So, what was happened is that the court found that there are reasonable grounds for believing that the accusation of the commission of the offense punishable under Chapter 4, punishment for terrorist activities, and 6, terrorist acts, organizations of the unlawful activities, that is Prevention Act against this Swami, found it is found prima facie as true. So thereby, since there is a bar imposed by section 43D class 5, which says that no person accused with chapters 4 and 6 shall be released on bail, he could not be released. So thereby, there is no bail granted to this F.R. Swami, but ultimately later he died. Now the question is, can there be a law for denial of bail under medical grounds, though prima facie there is a case of is committing an offense? This is what most important. For this, many legal luminaries are now claiming that the Honorable Supreme Court has to reconsider the decision given in UPA case. UPA means, I already read about that act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. This is UPA Act. As per section 43D class 5, as I already stated, if a person is accused with any of the offences mentioned in chapters 4 and 6, he shall not be released on bail. Now the Honorable Supreme Court has observed that the idea of presumption of innocence, a central principle in dealing with any of the accused or offences, is not applicable for this application of for this UPA Act. That is to say, in criminal law there is a principle that everybody is treated as an innocent. Then accused who is charged with an offense is presumed to be innocent. It is the duty of the prosecution to prove the guilt of that person. The prosecution has to place the evidence in order to allege and prove that that particular person has committed an offense. The presumption of innocence, a central principle of criminal law and procedure, is not followed while dealing with offences under chapter 4 and 6 of UPA Act, that is Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So this principle is not implemented in respect of this act as per the decision of the Honorable Supreme Court. The Honorable Supreme Court of India in April 2019, in a decision, this is very important, the decision is important, National Investigation Agency versus Jahur Ahmad Shah Watali. In this decision, while giving interpretation of the UPA, has affected all the downstream decisions involving the statute. As per this decision, all the high courts and the district courts, by implementing this decision, have been refusing to grant even medical bails. What this decision has said is, a new doctrine is created in this decision. As I said already, presumption of innocence is the principle of criminal law while considering about granting bail or convicting of a person of any offense. But this decision, which is given in April 2019 in National Investigation Agency versus Jahur Ahmad Shah Watali, on the interpretation of the UPA, has created a new doctrine, which is that effectively an accused must remain in custody throughout the period of trial, even if it is eventually proven that the evidence against the person was inadmissible and the accused is finally acquitted. So what will be the result of the case is not the criteria for refusing or granting the bail, but what is the criteria is that whether the allegation is under chapter 4 and 6, then as per section 43d5, he can be released on bail. This is the allegation. So ultimately, a case may be ended in acquittal, a person may be acquitted. But if the allegations are under this chapter, he shall not be granted bail. This is what the principle that is held or delivered in this case. The question is, if eventually a person accused of an offense is going to be acquitted, then why should he be continued in the jail, though the offense is charged under these particular provisions? In respect of this, lot of hue and cry is there. The court has held that at the stage of bail, the decision says essentially excluded the admissibility of evidence. It says that court must presume every allegation made in the FIR to be correct. Bail can now be obtained only if the accused produces material to contradict the prosecution. So the duty is on the accused to place evidence to prove that the allegations in the FIR are not correct. So for that, the accused has to place evidence and discharge the burden of proving the allegations. So the burden rests on the accused to disprove the allegations, which is virtually impossible in most cases. The decision has essentially excluded the admissibility of evidence at the stage of bail. By doing so, it is opined by many experts that it has effectively excluded the Evidence Act itself, which arguably makes the decision unconstitutional. People say, experts say that this particular decision and the principles involved or evolved in decisions are unconstitutional. So, how to get or obtain a bail when any person is charged with these offenses? He has to place evidence. What evidence? To prove that all the allegations that are made in the FIR are incorrect. The burden is on that person. So, due to this judgment, Honorable High Courts have their hands tied and they shall forced for refusing to grant bail, as disproving the case is virtually impossible. Taking advantage of this particular decision or the principles in that decision, it is alleged or said by many experts that the government, police and prosecution liberally abusing these provisions. Now all dissenters are routinely implicated under wild and improbable charges of sedition or criminal conspiracy and under the UPA. So we have to see whether this decision is incorrect or constitutional or unconstitutional practically, because a person if accused of any of the offenses under the, covered by chapters 4 and 6 as envisaged or mentioned in section 43D class 5, then the burden is on that person to place evidence to prove that the allegations in the FIR are incorrect. But it is highly not probable or possible for making or proving the allegations in the FIR incorrect at that stage. The effect is there is no possibility for getting bail if a person is charged with these offenses. So, by refusing these applications or by not conducting the trial of the cases, what is happening according to the experts is that if a person expresses dissent, in order to silence him, all the opposing voices, the cases are booked under this offense. Says people cite about Bhima Koregan cases, including F.R. Swami's case, as well as the cases pertaining to protests against Citizenship Amendment Act (CAA), where mere thought is elevated to a crime. This is what the criticism of right-thinking members of the society. It says that in multiple instances, evidence is untenable, sometimes even arguably planted and generally weak overall. That is to say, in support of the FIR, the police or the government or the prosecution is placing some evidence which is untenable, sometimes even arguably planted and generally weak overall, but even after that, that person cannot be granted bail because of the provision under that act, especially section 43D class 5. So with this, we can say this UPA being applied in order to see that the accuser cannot even get bail as per the opinions of several experts. That is to say, courts cannot go into the merits of the case due to the decision of the Honorable Supreme Court of India, which I referred earlier. So when you can't go into the merits of the case and the burden is on the accused to prove that allegations in FIR are incorrect and illegal, then where is the chance for the accused to get bail at that stage? And one more thing, we know very well practically that in India, the trial is conducted by taking long time, both for investigation and also for recording evidence. See, in those circumstances, even for medically unfit persons who are going to die, as in the case of F.R. Swami, who said that he wants to die in the jail itself, he doesn't want to take any treatment, and ultimately he died. You can say he is called as a caged bird can still sing, he had said in prison. This is what he said. He fought tirelessly for Jal, Jangil and Jameen for tribals, and ultimately, finally, he landed in this case and died. This way, experts say Article 21 is violated and these cases are filed and bail is not granted, even in cases which may finally end in acquittal. That's why there is a requirement of reconsideration of this decision and to consider that this decision is unconstitutional. So if you like this video, you please subscribe and request your friends to subscribe. Madam?
Yes, sir.
I think I dealt with all the aspects.
All the important aspects, sir. Yes, sir.
If necessary, we will also again take on this again.
Yes, sir. Yes.
If anybody is having any doubt, please ask. If you are required some more time, you can ask now, or we can extend the class, or next time you can ask. Madam, recorded videos, you please give it to them. I will also send the,
Yes,
I
sir.
also recorded, otherwise I
Every
will send.
week we upload it in YouTube, sir. And
Okay, madam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll take leave.
Yes.